Cole Perfetti and the Winnipeg Jets appear to be further apart in negotiations over a contract extension than originally thought. How long can the saga go on before things get hairy? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. More than anything, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, tonight's episode, we're kicking off with a bit of a perhaps disappointing conversation. It does seem like the Winnipeg Jets and Cole Perfetti are a bit further apart in their negotiations than initially believed. I was kind of under the impression that Winnipeg and Perfetti's camp are both pretty close to figuring something out. It doesn't really sound like that's the case. 32 Thoughts was asked about it, and the conversation seems to be that, by and large, things have not changed, and that, the question of money right now continues to be a bit of a bugbear. I think at this point they've sort of accepted that the deal is likely to be on the short-term side. The long-term contract does not necessarily seem to be the primary consideration here. Still room for that to change, but it does seem like Winnipeg is mostly interested in doing the 2-year deal. And if it's Perfetti's camp, I could perhaps see why they may also be interested in doing that. Something of a show me sort of contract for both parties, in that, Perfetti wants to maybe bet on himself a little bit, and the Jets want to maybe not lock up what they foresee as considerable cash into a player who technically on paper doesn't have some of the craziest stats profiles that you usually associate with a big 8-year plus mega deal, right? Obviously, if he was to sign for 6 or 7, maybe even 8 on the very high end, that's a fair bit of term. That's a lot of money. And for the Jets, maybe they're not comfortable with that yet. I feel like they're probably going to regret this in the long term, most likely, but it might be a two-way street where, Perfetti may be open to the idea of a contract extension that's long term, but perhaps, is asking for something that maybe is a little bit more expensive for the Jets than they would prefer to be paying right now. But, as far as the Jets are concerned, I think Winnipeg is going to be patient. I think they're going to not jump the gun. The problem is that if they wait too long, there is a penalty for not getting contracts with your RFAs sorted out faster. It's usually an increased cap hit in the first year that then kind of starts to dial down the following seasons. So there is some impetus to kind of get this done sooner rather than later. You don't want to kind of keep this going. And the other problem is that, the Jets are holding camp. Today, I believe, was the first day. And, Perfetti's been penciled in on the training camp rosters with the expectation that he was joining. And so without a contract, he's not going to start skating yet with Winnipeg's team. So, it is a bit of a frustrating thing. I guess my concern is that the longer this goes on, to me, it puts a slight strain on the relationship. Now, by and large, it doesn't really seem to be that big of a deal. I feel like of the sorts of players that you could have a contract dispute with, it does kind of seem like Perfetti has generally been very gracious. He did the NHL media tour. He's generally been showing up to Jets events and stuff. So there's no real concern over him wanting to depart, but I think it would be good for the Jets to kind of honor their end of the bargain and give him a reasonable contract that's probably closer to what he's asking for. I think it's a two-way street. And also, if the Jets do a bridge here, for those 2 years that you get him signed, he's going to give you crazy value. He's going to be one of Winnipeg's, I would say, breakout stars this year. I have been, a big cheerleader for him for a long time. And I think if Arniel really does see him the way that I think he should, Perfetti is going to be one of our premier creators on this team. I really feel like this season holds a ton of promise and potential. And for Perfetti, he's going to be extra motivated to really show the Jets why he should be extended long term. But at least in terms of the relationship, I guess the positive news is that it doesn't seem like Cole is too bothered by any of this. Obviously, he's not going to report for training camp and stuff. So you probably want to get this sorted out soon. Aside from like the cap penalty thing, I think the most important part is just getting him back up to speed, getting him, with NHL reps and getting ready for the season, because you don't want him missing time to start the year and have this sort of drag into, the start of the season before, Perfetti is able to even take the ice. So I think it's important for the Jets to sort this out very soon. I would like them to do it before preseason really gets underway at the end of this week. I guess it's not that likely. It sounds like Winnipeg is still not quite as close as we would like to, getting this contract sorted out. But then again, maybe it is closer than we think. I think Dreger was one of the most recent reports on this. So, sometimes he doesn't always have the timing right on things. Obviously, he gets, secondhand information. And with the Jets, they tend to be very secretive about things. I don't think that this has been quite as closely guarded a secret. So I suspect, what's been reported is by and large true. I just hope that, they're able to close that gap sooner rather than later, and that the Jets can kind of put this behind them. It's sort of funny that, we talk about Winnipeg being concerned about losing talents and players, and when they have a chance to extend one of their young players that's really a guy that they should be considering as part of their really long-term core, they don't want to pay him. To me, it's kind of not great. I get that it's just part of the business, and there is some of a pragmatic streak that you need to have here. But by the same token, if your concern is that you're going to lose your young talents, then give them a reason to stick around and show, anyone else out there who's, perhaps a future Jets draft pick or considering coming to Winnipeg, that the Jets actually are committed to their core and that they will, compensate their players at a good rate. Obviously, the Jets don't throw money at a lot of players anymore. Aside from Hellebuyck and Scheifele, I think the Wheeler thing probably spooked them a bit. DeMello was a little pricier than I'm sure they were hoping for, but overall, I think the Jets generally keep cost conscious about a lot of things. So, that has its positives and its downsides at times. I think this might be one of those times where it could eventually get to be a much more expensive proposition for them once Perfetti's bridge is over, but it is what it is. I guess the good news is the cap will be higher by the time we're at that stage, and if that's the case, maybe the Jets aren't too worried about whatever the extra million or so is going to look like. So I don't know. I'm not really sure what Winnipeg's calculus is here. I don't quite know where they're sitting at the dollar amount. They're clearly spooked by the Shane Pinto deal. So if that's the basis, like 3.75 per season, then they're probably looking more on the lower end of that, maybe closer to 3 or 3.25, which that's a fairly significant difference. So something to keep an eye on. Let's just hope they get it sorted. This is kind of a distraction, and you don't really want distractions heading into the start of the season. Now, speaking of the start of the season, I alluded to training camp earlier. The Jets have released their rosters for the start of camp, and obviously this is going to be a big deal for starting to piece together where Arniel feels certain players should be, and one of those guys is going to be Kyle Connor. The group that he's skating with might give you some pause, perhaps a little bit of concern for how the lines might be this season. We'll chat about that in just a quick minute. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, we all know that buying any sort of event tickets, whether it's for sporting events or concerts, can be a huge pain, right? You add your ticket to your cart, you see one price, you hit checkout, and suddenly you're hit with like $30, $40 in fees, sometimes way more depending on how expensive the ticket you're buying is. And you think to yourself, am I paying for one ticket or two? Gametime gets it. They've been there before themselves, and that's why they offer a great way to save time and money with the Gametime app. They also have an all-in pricing feature that you can toggle on, which shows you all of the fees and everything up front. What's great about Gametime is that they also have a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Obviously, you might also be wondering, well, if you're talking about this service saving time and money, what makes Gametime better than anyone else? And Gametime offers you seat views before you buy. They come backed with a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. And of course, the closer you get to the timing of your event, whether it's maybe a basketball game, a hockey game, if you're a Jets fan, prices actually go down. They offer you flash sales, zone deals, and lower prices the closer you get to that first puck drop. It's a great option. Of course, like I said, you can toggle on all-in pricing to see what you're paying up front, and it just makes things so much easier. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting about Winnipeg and sort of training camp getting underway. Obviously, a lot going on. This is a big time for the Jets. I think this season has a lot of uncertainty for a lot of us. I think that there's a lot of excitement, perhaps a lot of concern about the direction the team is going, partly because it's going to be a much younger team, going to be a very different sort of season than I think the past couple of years have looked like. So, with all of that, my take is that, look, there's going to be rough patches. I think there's going to be some growing pains with this team. I'm not going to stress about it. This year, whatever the Jets do, whether they're great, whether they're mediocre, whether they really struggle, I think, what I said on the last episode is that the most important thing is you show growth and development as an organization. And, the kids are also growing at the same time. If you can focus on that part and really have the kids develop, I don't worry so much about the other stuff. This year for me is about building good long-term habits and getting the team into a healthier state. And to that end, obviously training camp is coming up, and Arniel has sort of stressed the idea of modernizing this team. He had a whole analytics summit and everything. And so suffice it to say, people were kind of a little bit concerned when the training camp rosters came out today, and you looked at the two groups. And in the first group, you're looking at more of the top line players, right? You see Velarde, you see Scheifele, and guess who else is in this group? Kyle Connor. Connor, look, I've always thought of him as a great goal scorer. I think he's a phenomenal player. I also think that when he plays with Mark Scheifele, he is not the best version of himself. He might score tons of goals, but he also, when paired with Scheifele, spends a lot of his time in the defensive zone because Scheifele's own defensive work has really started to take a step back over the past several years. So when you have them together and you have Velarde, who's not really able to get those two out of trouble, it's just a not great mixture. And having Connor and Scheifele together has been a huge problem over the years. It's something that Winnipeg has really struggled to get away from. And maybe I'm reading too much into this roster, but given the fact that we're seeing Miller and Hanola together, and some of the other guys that have traditionally been in that top line role on this particular grouping, I just feel like we're already going to see the Connor Scheifele thing again. Maybe Arniel's just testing it to see if his systems change their performance, but I can't say that fills me with loads and loads of confidence. And I don't want to read too much into it again. It is just training camp, but it's just because this team has such a pattern of doing this, it does kind of worry me just a little bit that this is the direction the Jets are leaning towards. Now, in terms of the two rosters, you've got Team Neufeld and Team Lesek. On Team Neufeld, you've got Milic, Hellebuck, and DiVincentis in net. On the defender side, you've got Miller, Heinola, Lundmark, Morrissey, Coughlin, Sandberg, Salamonson, and Kuzman all together. And then, of course, where the concern was, you've got the forward grouping. So you've got 16 forwards here: Velarde, Kupari, Gustafsson, Shaw, Anderson Dolan, Jaeger, Barron, Scheifele, Lopone, Julian, Janssen Fjallby, Walton, Connor, Ben King, Chibrikov, and Perfetti. So obviously, not everyone here is on that top line thing. You'll see lots of depth players, but I think the top line players that were chosen, it's curious that they're all together in this group. So for Winnipeg, I mean, I guess my biggest question is, are they planning to repeat the same thing that they did last year and in the years prior? I really feel like that top line has to be much better in performance because, listen, Winnipeg doesn't have the talent depth of most of these other elite contenders. They just don't. And the sooner that people realize that, the more that you'll kind of begin to accept that having a top line that maybe doesn't score at the most elite levels, but can at least dictate the terms of play and control those shifts is really critical to setting up success for everyone else. The Jets aren't going to have the crazy franchise level talent that a lot of these teams do, but you can win by committee. And I think that's where the Jets can be really strong if they have a first line that continues to set the pace and drive results early. If it softens those matchups, if it makes everything easier for the subsequent three lines, that can make a world of difference. Now, on Team Lesuk, you've got Comrie and Kakinen in that. On the blue line, you've got DeMello, Pionk, Fleury, Saltner, Stanley, Bauer, Anhorn, Bartow. And then the forward grouping is Nemesnikov, Iafallo, Lowry, Toninato, Appleton, Ehlers, Torgerson, Barlow, Lucius, Nikkanen, Zhilkin, Niederreiter, Ford, Levis, and Lambert. So here you kind of get a sense that the second line may end up looking something like Ehlers, Nemesnikov, and Lambert or something like that. Maybe Perfetti in there, I guess, instead of Nemesnikov. I don't know. The thing with this group is that you see a lot of middle six sorts of players here, right? Guys who are either on the second line or third line, all playing in this group. This, to me, is very clearly the not top line group. And so if that's the case, great for Lambert, but not so great if you're thinking about that whole Kyle Connor question that I was just talking about. But again, it is just training camp. I don't want to read too much into it. And I think Arniel's own comments about Winnipeg perhaps not being married to that duo maybe gives me some confidence that we're going to see something different this season. Maybe this is just sort of training camp for familiarity. Arniel's coming in for the first time as a full-time head coach. Maybe he doesn't want to rock the boat immediately. Maybe he wants to give it some time to get guys comfortable before he starts making his adjustments. Maybe Scheifele is the one calling the shots. Maybe he is driving, Connor being with him on his line and grouping. And maybe that's something that Arniel can't really work around. Maybe that's just one of those workplace kind of things that you can't really change. And if that's the case, if that's really what's behind all of it, to some degree, I do understand that. Being a head coach can be at times like being an office manager and sort of trying to run a company, which you balance a lot of relationships and keeping guys happy, especially the important ones. But I think in this case, at some point, you've got to just sort of make the hard choice and arrange the lines in a way that gives this team the best chance of success. But of course, like I said, it's just training camp groupings, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is very set in stone and that this is going to be the way the Jets are for the start of the regular season. It just seems to be pointing to some stuff that we've seen before, and maybe not the happiest, most exciting stuff. I think for my take, it'd be nice if the Jets can maybe experiment a little bit, go for stuff that's going to give them more offensive stability, go for some combos that have at least worked better in the past. Maybe it doesn't work again, but I would at least like to see some of the more tried and proven stuff like Ehler, Scheifele, and Velarde that did work a pretty good treat when Arneal united them for the first time over some of the combos that we just know don't work all that well. But, that's my soapbox. That's sort of something that I've continually touched on. Maybe you feel differently. Let me know how you feel about Connor on the first line on the comments below, or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. I'm sure at least one of you disagrees and you're like, oh man, he is talking crazy. Now, amidst all of this, I thought, it might be time to revisit one particular thing and one particular point that has come up before in the past, but it's really about the sort of bet the Jets are making here, and I want to talk about the likelihood that this bet actually pays off. We'll chat about this bet in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel because they're America's #1 sportsbook. They're safe, secure, easy to use. They've got tons of props, odds, and lines for any sort of sport that you're interested in. They cover football, college sports, basketball, hockey, of course, MLB, and so much more. And obviously, for a lot of you Jets fans, it's getting to be an exciting time. Maybe you want to pick the over on Winnipeg's season point standings projections, which I think FanDuel has us at like 94.5 right now, which I've said before is in my mind a little bit low, but also given the amount of young talent the Jets have brought in over some of the more experienced veterans, maybe that's a sign that the team is going to take a step back. So if you want to make a safe bet, maybe go for the over there, but I wouldn't know for sure. This season is very uncertain, but you know what? Regardless of, how likely it is that the Jets get closer to 100 plus points this season, there is an offer that you can take advantage of that I think is actually pretty cool, especially if you also watch football. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Again, that's just a $5 bet, and you get a 3 free-week trial. To get started, just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just closing out really quickly with some thoughts ahead of the start of the season in just a couple of weeks. Winnipeg, I have kind of alluded to before, is making a bet this year. A very big one, because if you look at their offseason moves and how the Jets have sort of approached their signings and stuff, I would say that Winnipeg, by and large, made moves by not making moves, right? They didn't really bring back Sean Monahan. They let Tyler Toffoli go. Brendan Dillon departed. Kind of strange to think about how many really good veterans sort of walked away from the team. And I know people will say, Monahan and Toffoli were only brought in as rentals, and that's true for Toffoli maybe, but I think the intention was absolutely to bring back Monahan if the Jets could, which thankfully I think, Columbus came in with a better offer. I just think that as good as Monahan was during the regular season, I think long-term he just didn't really fit the direction the Jets were going, and sometimes not locking in those roster spots and leaving yourself the ability to sort of experiment and test out things is better than committing lots of money up front, because once you get that contract signed, you are kind of locked in. And that's where I think the Jets have tried to some degree, set this year up as a bet that your young talent is going to lead the way and be ready to take the next step. This is probably in my mind, a fairly big gamble. I think it comes back with Hellebuck being Hellebuck, and that's probably what the Jets are betting on, right? They know that this is not going to be a high-end playoff elite team. They probably figure the Jets are going to be fighting more in the wild card territory, maybe fringe top 3 in the Central if everything breaks 100% right. But I think they're sort of projecting that this season is going to be a little bit of a step back in the standings compared to like last year, which, like I said, is okay. I guess my concern is that if the rookies don't really hit the ground running, the Jets could be in some trouble very quickly. Winnipeg doesn't have like loads of elite offensive talent, especially on the veteran side. If the kids struggle, the Jets don't really have replacements that can just come in and provide, NHL caliber, playoff caliber output. They've got lots of guys who are good in depth roles and middle six roles, but they don't have a lot of high-end players. So this gamble for me, it could backfire if the Jets have a big injury that's long-term. I think that's where they get screwed the most is they don't really have a lot of injury depth. They have some insurance. They have some guys that they could call up, but I wouldn't sit here and say that there's a lot of players either in the farm or with the Moose that are going to be able to step in and help the Jets in case of a very serious long-term injury. We've seen that happen with Ehlers. We've seen it happen with Scheifele, and Connor has missed time too. There's a player I'm thinking about who, if he gets injured, this team's probably just cooked. I'm not going to talk about that. You probably know where I'm going with that. But out of not wanting to jinx it, I'm just going to pretend he's going to stay healthy the whole season, and it's not going to be a problem. There is maybe one other name that I could consider in that sort of tier, but he is perhaps slightly less important than the one name that I'm thinking of. So all that to say, the Jets just really don't have the luxury of being able to afford any injuries. That is not a great spot to be in, if I'm being honest. Relying on full health for the roster is probably a bit of a fool's errand. But I think for the Jets, given the circumstances and what, the likely outcome was if they tried to sign lots of veterans and really go ham in free agency, this is probably a better approach. I think that there's a reasonable risk things don't go well, and maybe if Lambert doesn't hit the ground running, people will start to look at the Jets and say, how could you allow this to happen? How could you make this gamble and not have backup plans? But it's just a part of it, right? If you're going to go with the youth and you're really, really leaning on them like the Jets appear to be doing so this season, then you're going to have to accept that you may end up falling out of a playoff spot at some point if things really don't go well. But here's kind of the not so kind thing to admit. If the Jets miss the playoffs and they get a reasonably high draft pick, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't want to sit here and say like tanking is a great, task. I think for the Jets, they're going to do everything that they can to avoid tanking because it hurts their attendance revenues and stuff. But listen, I've said it before, the only way to really build your franchise out is with big draft picks. And if the Jets do really, really badly this year and things completely go pear-shaped, getting a top draft pick this year would not be the worst outcome. So, just one of those things to keep in mind, that even if the Jets lose, they can still win, if you catch my meaning. Again, I don't think that this scenario is all that likely. I think the Jets are probably going to make the playoffs. I think Winnipeg has, they are taking a big swing here. But this is the kind of swing that I think they've needed to take for a long time. If you're not going to clog your roster with lots of veterans who aren't going to help you, then lean on the kids and go internal. That's how it should have been from the start. I think that's how this team has to build for success for the future. And hopefully this is the model that they adopt for their so-called draft and develop ambitions. But let me know how you feel about all of this. Are you comfortable with this risk? Do you want them to do something different? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll have more continuing preseason and start of the regular season coverage over the next couple of days, so tune in then. But like I said, that is all the time that we have for tonight. As always, thanks for listening. Have a great night. And of course, go Jets go.